We're continuing our look at the contingency theories of leadership, recognizing that different situations may require different styles of leadership. And so we're looking at situational leadership. So situational leadership says that the leader can actually change their leadership approach based on the readiness of the followers. So you identify the extent to which your subordinates have the ability and the willingness to accomplish a specific task, and then the style of leadership meets the employee's needs. So when we look at situational leadership, what we have is 4 leadership styles. And those 4 leadership styles are based on task behavior. So this would be how much direction, how much information do the employees need in terms of what to do and how to do it. And then the relationship behavior, which is how much support do they need in terms of that relationship, in terms of the emotional support from the manager or the leader. So we can look at if we have a task that needs a lot of direction. So you need to be told exactly how to do it. And we don't have that emotional support from a relationship between manager or between employee and leader. Then the leadership style we're going to need is going to be more telling. So the leader will define the roles and tell the people how to do the task. Now, if you have a relationship between your employees and your leadership, and there's still a high task, so a lot of direction is needed, then because there's that trust with the leader, it is more of a selling leadership style. So it's more focused on providing more general direction, more supportive behavior, more explaining and persuading. Here's why we're doing things in terms of leading the employees. If you have low task behavior, so not a lot of direction, not a lot of information is needed in terms of what to do and how to do it, but you have a low relationship, so there's not a lot of support, not a relationship between the employees and the leader, then it's going to be more delegating. So there's little direction, there's little support, the group takes responsibility, the individuals are acting more on their own, a more hands-off leadership style. If you have low task behavior, so we have not a lot of direction is needed, not a lot of instructions about how to do the job, but we do have that close relationship between employees and leadership, then it is more of a participatory leadership style where there is shared information and ideas and employees can share in the decision making. So there's different types of leadership depending on how much direction and information is needed to the employee to do the job, and what kind of relationship there is between the employee and the employer. So we have these 4 types of situational leadership, and they come from Hersey and Blanchard. They were actually building on that grid that we talked about previously. So if we just go back to the managerial grid that we got from Blake and Moten. So the managerial grid, you remember, has 5 types of leadership based on concern for production and concern for people. And so what we see here with situational leadership is focusing on the amount of direction as opposed to the focus on output. And then again, that concern for people similarly with the amount of relationship. So if we go back to Hersey and Blanchard, they were building on this grid. But they wanted to allow for the fact that there are different situations that might require different styles of leadership. Whereas what we saw with the managerial grid is it was fixed in terms of this is the preferred behavior, is more theory. Why is more of the having a relationship with your employees and focusing on production. So here Hersey and Blanchard are focusing on the followers. So what are the followers like? What do they need? And then that will determine the type of leadership. So they're classifying the employees into one of 4 categories. I'm just going to move my face a bit. And you can see the labels here in terms of R's and D's. And that's because Hersey and Blanchard, they did their work together initially, and then they parted ways. And so over time, their theories have kind of separated, morphed a bit. And so one is using R's and one is using D's. But essentially, there's 4 types of followers. There's the follower who is able and willing to do what you ask. On the other extreme, there's the employee who is unable and unwilling to take responsibility when given it. So they're not going to do what's asked. And then you have in between those who are able to do the task, but they're unwilling. So they lack the motivation, they have the ability. In terms of, remember, performance is ability times motivation. And then you have those who are unable, so going back to ability, maybe that's resources, skills, training, but they are motivated. So depending on what type of employee you have determines which type of leadership is appropriate. So I'm just going to move my face back. And then let's go to the next slide. All right. So you can see the 2 different versions here because, as I said, they split ways, and so they kind of amended their situational leadership into 2 different methods. So let's kind of bounce back and forth between this and what we had on the previous slide. So let's look at what we're calling R1D1, unable and unwilling to take responsibility. If this is a person whose performance is poor because they don't have the ability and they don't have the motivation, then the situational leadership they need is telling. The leader defines the role, tells people how to do the task. This is very much the theory X in terms of looking at McGregor. So if we go back, real fast, right? The authoritarian management style, workers have little ambition, they want to avoid responsibility. You needed to be a bit dictatorial and authoritarian. So the leadership style theory X is appropriate when, if we go back, you have an R1 or a D1, they're unable and unwilling to take responsibility, which Hersey and Blanchard are calling the telling leadership style. Leader defines the roles, tells people how to do the tasks. All right. Well, what about the R2 or D2? So if we look at R2 or D2, they are willing, so they're motivated, but they lack the skills. So if you have motivated workers, but they don't have the skills, then according to Hersey and Blanchard, you should be using more of a selling approach if we're using the original language, or a coaching approach. Okay. So here we are providing general direction, more supportive behavior, because we know they're willing, we just need to show them how they are able to do it. So we need to provide them with that piece. Then we have R3D3. So they're able, but they're unwilling. So they lack the motivation. If they lack the motivation, then we need to have more of a participatory or supportive style of leadership. And so that participatory style was having them share in the decision making. So if people lack motivation, one way to engage them, get them to buy in, is to be part of that decision-making process, have a say in the outcomes of the organization. And so that's that participating or supportive piece that you see there. And then we have the group that is able and willing to do what is asked. For that group, they have what they need, and so you can delegate the authority to them, leave them. They don't need direction or support. They're good to go because they are able. They have the ability, they have the motivation, and so they will work just fine on their own. So here, in terms of situational leadership, they are, depending on what the employee is like, determines the type of leadership that the leader needs to take on. And so you can see here how it's morphed over time. So originally the model was participating, selling, delegating, telling. And you can see that here on the left. And then some of the wording has changed when they split ways. Participating is also called supporting. Selling is also called coaching. Telling is also called directing. So you might see it either way in terms of the situational leadership aspect.